When we're talking about texture in art, it's about how something feels or looks like it may feel. So because we're working on a flat surface, we're creating the illusion of a specific surface. We're going on a texture tour. So textures can be rough, they can be smooth, they can be spiky or spiny, they can be very fluffy, just like petting a dog. If you have a dog at home, hair has texture to it. These you may not want to touch, or just be careful if you're going to touch them. Think of animals from the ocean, like a tidal pool. Some of those have a lot of interesting textures to them. Food can have a texture. This sack has this woven, rough, coarse texture. So it can be both man-made stuff, like that's a man-made item, or it can be something that's found in nature, like these blades of grass, a little bit blurry. This is an up-close of wood grain, so you can see just from the surface alone that it has some coarseness to it. These are rocks of different sizes. Crusty, withered grass. An up-close of a basket weave. Okay, now that you know what texture means and what to look for, we're going to be starting on this worksheet that I made for you. So if you don't have a printer, that's okay. You can draw this out. You can do 1 inch by 1 inch for the small squares and go double that, so 2 by 2 on those lower 3 squares. The only thing is you're going to have to draw the sphere, and for today's assignment, I've decided that we should just stick to those small boxes, so the ones that are on top. We'll get to the spheres for next class. It's a lot, and I actually want you to devote your time and effort into those texture boxes. Okay, so we're ready to start this bad boy. We're going to start up with the smaller boxes first, and you are welcome to borrow some of my references or find all of them on your own. The bottom row, the last 4, you're going to be definitely finding your own references around your house. I'm sure you have tons of texture available. So I've opted for the harder route. The harder route is to draw from life. So I actually have all those objects that I've brought out to my studio space. And I'm doing that so that I can hone my drawing and observational skills. So I've snapped a couple of branches off of a plant that I have. I think it's a tropical plant. Looks kind of like an asparagus fern. But anyway, I like the soft, feathery quality about it. So that's why I'm drawing it. And I'm drawing that stem as a double line that ends in a point. And then it has these interesting leaves. So I'm going to fast forward this so you can see it in time lapse. So I'm just making sure that I have 2 that are crisscrossing just so that I'm filling up most of the square. And that's something that you guys want to do too. You want to make sure that about 75% of this square at least is filled up with drawing. So this guy has these really interesting leaves. It almost looks like an asterisk, you know, like that star shape. And they kind of intersect at a point. And you can actually see it on the screen there. And I'm holding it up and I'm looking at it, trying to duplicate, not 100%, not necessarily exactly accurate, but I'm just trying to document that feathery feel. Okay, so this is popcorn, and I put it in a little plastic cup, and I was looking at it kind of layered. So there's popcorn on the top, but then you can look down and see some of the bottom layers of the popcorn. And popcorn operates kind of like clouds, big puffy cumulus clouds. So I'm actually using a lot of all one line. I'm not lifting up a ton there to try and get that shape exactly. It does not have to be 100% accurate here, but you do want to try and get the shape to the best of your ability. And popcorn's great because it has all these poofs and then stuff that goes in. I'm also going to add some hatching. So remember, hatching is what we did on Monday. And maybe even a little bit of cross hatching. The hatching is to indicate areas that are in shadow that are kind of sucking in or going towards the center of that cup on the bottom. And it's just to help me get a little bit of form in there. Popcorn is incredibly interesting to look at from an artistic point of view. It's fun stuff. So I'm just going back in and curving my stroke on some of those hatch marks there to give it a little bit more form. If I were trying to replicate it exactly, I'd spend a lot more time. But that's the basic shape, and it's an organic object. All right, so now we're going on. These are strings, so they're kind of like this old-fashioned brown twine. You can see where it's curving over. If you opt to do string or twine or rope, I would recommend that you have some string that overlaps, some that is underneath. You can also twist it or curve it, just like you're seeing there. So for this, I'm going to use more of the stippling kind of effect. I'm trying to create the look of bumps, like bumpy texture. So I'm looking at a avocado skin, that dark avocado skin with all of its raised bumps. It looks kind of weird the closer you approach it and examine that skin. It's got that bumpy, rough texture. I am trying to get a shadow side to the bumps so that they seem more like semi-spheres. In my garage, I noticed I had some birdseed, and what I like about the birdseed is it comes in different size seeds. So there are some that are really tiny seeds, and then there are some that are medium, and then there are some that are some big fat sunflower seeds. So whenever you have variety in a pattern, it can help make that pattern more interesting. So pattern is kind of a part of texture. There usually is a pattern involved, but that's not the only component. I'm going to try and convey the rough texture of the seeds. They have these little ridges on them, and also they have that sharp point on one end. Speaking of sharp, so I cut a section of the rose bush. So this is like the stick part of the rose bush essentially. And I am preparing to draw those spines. And that's the stem. The gaps are for where those spines will be, where those thorns. And I'm using a combination of line, dotted line, dashed line. You can use it all. I'm also going to be using a hatch in this too. And not every spike is exactly the same size, so you would have to pay attention to that. And there are some spikes that are on the inside of that cylinder or that stem. By the way, this is what all my roses look like before I de-thorn them. I actually had to pull all the thorns off. Or just hold them delicately between two pinched fingers if I wanted to pick one. So you can see that I'm trying to use a hatch line on the stem itself to make it seem like it's darker towards the bottom. And I've done that just by putting the hatch lines closer together as they move towards the bottom of that square, and then they get farther apart as they move up on that stem. So I'm trying to kind of create a little bit of the illusion of light and shadow there. On this one, because this stem is farther back, I'm going to go ahead and put a hatch or a cross hatch over the whole thing. That pushes it back, so that way the one that's in front gets to pop and arrange itself in the front of the frame. For this one, I'm going for the texture of fur or hair. You can use your own reference. I'm just looking at this furry stuffed animal thing that my daughter had laying around, so I'm using that as a model. You do want to let fur kind of crisscross, like one strand crosses over into another from time to time. There are areas with fur where it's just going to be darker. Sometimes it's a pattern, like if you're trying to draw a tabby cat's fur, there's going to be coloration because there's actually like a stripe there, but there should be shadow as well. So fur texture is also very similar to how a bunch of grass would look too. The last one I'm going to demo for you is of a rose. So it's a rose I picked from my garden and I have it in my other hand, so my non-drawing hand. And I'm starting with the inside shape. So it's not a fully opened rose, it's kind of in between that stage of bud and actual bloom. So roses do kind of spiral in, but you don't actually want to draw a spiral. You want to look and isolate shapes. So you start with one shape and then you kind of radiate out from there. And the petals overlap. And they're almost like crescents on the inside, like crescent shapes, one curled on top of the other. There's a little bit of an overlap. And then they start to flare out as they open up. And I am going to use a little bit of a hatch on this too. And I'm starting to fill in some shadow areas because that helps me to figure out where I am in the drawing. So if I can't see those shadow areas and what's supposed to be dark and what's supposed to be light, then I can get lost. Same might be true for you. Lost meaning lost in the drawing, like, hey, wait, where am I again? Because there's so much little detail to try and ferret out when you're doing a rose. A daisy is way easier, but a rose is really fun too. So sometimes roses have petals that have these little nicks in them. That's what I was drawing just a moment ago. There's a little like V shape in there. And that's pretty common. And I am giving those shadow areas different values. They're not all the same. I'm using a little bit of crosshatch. Sorry it's a little bit blurry. I think my camera wasn't quite focused on that one. I think it was focused on the one next to it. So I'm just going to let the flower be a zoomed in version so it's a cropped pic. But flowers are very soft. They have that soft feel. You can almost imagine how that would feel to touch that kind of satiny of the petals. Whereas the fir might also feel soft, but if it's blades of grass, it could have some coarseness to it. So again, just to reiterate, you don't have to use my references. You don't have to copy from these for the first two rows. You're welcome to if you want. But the last boxes, those last small boxes, you're going to be finding your own pictures or stuff from around the house, which would be even better. Try and look for some textures that we haven't used already for those last 4 squares. It's like with the assignment before, this should be done in pen if you have it.